I'm Tessa Rourke, 48 years old, and I have spent my whole career being the person who comes when no one else will. For 17 years, I flew combat rescue helicopters, and I gave everything I had to men I would never meet again, asking for nothing back, not even my name remembered. But when a young man on a firing line decided I was a joke worth telling in front of everyone, I said 2 quiet words, and the whole range went still. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand quietly in the truth while someone tried to make you small, hit that like button and subscribe. The road out to the range runs through almond country before it ever reaches anything that belongs to the Navy, and at 5 in the morning it is just me and the headlights and a thermos of coffee going cold in the cup holder. I made that drive on a Tuesday in early spring, a range bag on the passenger seat, a worn leather case with my pistol zipped inside it, and nothing on me that said who I was. No rank on my collar, no name tape, just an old flight jacket with the patches stripped off and a ball cap pulled low over my eyes. I wanted it that way. In 3 weeks, I would stand in a hangar and take command of a combat rescue wing, and 1,000 people would learn my name whether they wanted to or not. That morning, I wanted to be nobody. I wanted to shoot my qualification, sign the card, and drive home with the radio on and the windows down. I have spent a lifetime being underestimated by people who only ever saw the smallest version of me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped fighting it. The truth does not need me to defend it. It just needs me to show up, do the work, and let the record say what I will not. So I was not nervous about being read wrong that morning. I expected it the way you expect traffic. What I did not expect was how far back the day would reach before it was over. All the way to a girl on the hood of a truck in Tulare County, watching crop dusters bank over the rows and deciding without telling a single soul that one day she would be the one in the cockpit. I was 18 the summer I knew for certain. The dusters would come in low over our place just after dawn, yellow and battered, smelling of fuel and cut alfalfa, and I would lie back on the warm metal of my father's truck and follow them until they were specks against the foothills. My father, Vernon, fixed those planes. He could take a radial engine apart blindfolded and put it back together by feel in the dark, but he never once flew. He thought flying was for other people, people with money, people who had somewhere soft to fall back to if it all went wrong. We did not have that. We had the ranch, the co-op, and a careful, narrow idea of what a Rourke was allowed to want out of a life. One evening I told him I wanted to fly for the Navy. He did not laugh, which somehow was worse than if he had. He wiped his hands slow on a rag and looked at me the way you look at a child who has just said something that is going to hurt them later and you cannot figure out how to stop it. "Flying's no place for a girl, Tess," he said. "You want to be useful. Learn to keep the books at the co-op. That's steady. That's real. That's something a person can count on." I did not argue. Arguing with my father was like arguing with the weather. You could yell at a thunderstorm all you wanted and it would still rain on you. But that night my mother, Mary Bell, came into my room without a word and set a paperback down on my pillow. It was a beat-up library copy of a book about naval aviators, the cover gone soft from other hands. She did not say anything about it, not then, and not for years afterward. She just left it there and turned off the light and pulled the door most of the way shut. I read that book 4 times before it was due back at the branch library, and then I checked it out again. There was an air show that came through Fresno the spring I turned 17, and I begged a ride off a neighbor and went alone, and I stood at the fence line for 6 straight hours in the heat while military aircraft I had only ever seen in that library book came screaming down out of the blue right over my head. A petty officer at a recruiting booth watched me watch them, and instead of handing me a brochure, he asked me what I saw when I looked up. I told him I did not see a machine. I saw a promise. I saw someone, somewhere, deciding to come anyway. He looked at me a long moment and told me the Navy could use a person who thought like that, and that the door was not as closed as people back home liked to tell me it was. I did not have the words for it then, but I drove home that night certain of something, the way you are only ever certain of a few things in a whole life. I taught myself everything I could get my hands on after that. I read every manual the library could order in. I built model after model on my bedroom floor. And I never once told my father because I already knew what his face would do. People assume I joined to prove him wrong. I did not, and I want to be clear about that because it matters to the whole rest of this story. I did not put on the uniform to win an argument with Vernon Rourke. I joined because of a feeling I could not shake, the feeling that I wanted to be the person who comes when no one else will. Somewhere out there in the wide world, I figured, people were going to find themselves in the worst moment of their entire lives, in the dark, out of options, out of time, and someone was going to have to fly toward them instead of away from them. I wanted, more than I had ever wanted anything, to be that someone. That was the bond underneath everything else, deeper than family, older than rank, steadier than any pride. It was the first true thing I ever knew about myself, and I learned it lying on a truck hood at 18, watching a yellow plane disappear over the hills with the sun coming up behind it. Everything that happened on that range 17 years later, every rifle that came down, traces straight back to that girl and that sky. So that is where I have to start. I earned my wings of gold in the spring of 2002, 24 years old, standing in a row of brand new aviators while a captain pinned the gold to my chest and shook my hand and called me by a rank I was still getting used to hearing. I called home that night from a payphone outside the officers' club, feeding quarters into the slot, the desert air still warm at 9 in the evening. My mother cried so hard she had to hand the phone to my father. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me when I might get a real posting somewhere near family. I remember standing there holding the receiver, looking down at the wings on my chest, and understanding, with a strange and quiet calm, that the recognition I wanted was never going to come from that house. Not because they did not love me, they did, but because they could not see the thing I had become. It was outside the borders of what they knew how to imagine. So I made a decision right there at that payphone. I stopped waiting for it. I stopped checking their faces for a reaction that was not coming. That turned out to be the single most useful thing I ever learned, although it took me another 20 years to understand exactly why. The Navy is not the place people picture when they imagine glory. The flying I did in those early years was plane guard and logistics, hauling parts and people and mail, orbiting a carrier at night in a holding pattern in case some pilot put his jet into the water and needed someone to come pull him out before the cold took him. Nobody writes songs about the helicopter. The fast jets get the recruiting posters and the movies. We get the call at 3 in the morning when it has all gone sideways and somebody's in the water in the dark and the clock is running. I learned to love that, strange as it sounds. I learned that being reliable, being the sound a desperate person hears coming out of the black, was worth more than any poster ever printed. It was in those years that I met Robin Achebe. She was a junior aviator like me, sharp and funny and completely unimpressed by anyone's swagger, including her own. We flew together, stood duty together, ate 1,000 bad meals together at 2 in the morning, and somewhere in all of that we became the kind of friends who can say the true thing to each other without it breaking anything. One night on the flight deck, both of us bone-tired, the ship rolling gently under us and the stars out to the horizon, she said something I have carried for more than 20 years. "Nobody writes songs about the people who come to pick you up, Tess," she said. "Nobody. They just really, really want us there when it goes bad. Remember that on the days it feels like nobody sees you. The people who matter will want you there more than anything in the world. They just won't know your name until they need it." I held on to that, and I needed to because the world kept on reading me wrong. Early in one tour, a senior officer walked into the ready room, looked straight past me, and asked the room when the squadron's admin officer would have his paperwork finished. He assumed I was a clerk. The men around me went still, not sure where to look or what to do. I did not raise my voice. I did not make it a fight. I slid my flight log across the table, opened to the page with my hours on it, and told him plainly that I was a pilot and that the paperwork he was after was not mine to keep. He turned a color I will not soon forget, somewhere between red and gray, and he stammered an apology and left. And here is the thing I want you to really hear, because it is the heart of everything that came later. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I had already learned that being underestimated was simply the cost of looking like me in a room like that, and that the only answer that ever held up was the record. Let them get me wrong. The logbook does not lie. The hours are the hours. The truth keeps its own ledger, and it does not need me to shout. There was a night, early on, that taught me what the job really was, long before the Kunar ever did. We launched in weather we had no business launching in to pull a sailor out of the water who had gone over the side of a destroyer in the dark. I was the co-pilot. I remember the spray coming up over the windscreen and the swells like black hills moving under us, and I remember the moment we put the light on him, this small, pale face in all the water, both arms up, and the look on it. He had stopped believing anyone was coming. You could see it. And then we were there, and you could see that change too, the exact instant a human being decides he's going to live after all. We got him up the cable, half frozen and shaking, and he grabbed my flight suit with both hands in the back of that cabin and would not let go the whole way home. Nobody at the bar wrote a song about it. There was no ceremony. But I understood, somewhere over that black water, that I had found the one thing on this earth I was built to do, and that it did not matter at all whether anyone ever knew my name for doing it. The face in the water knew. That was always going to be enough. That became the pattern of my whole early career. People saw a small version of me and they acted on it, and I let the work be the only rebuttal I ever offered. What none of them understood, what I myself did not fully understand yet, was that the work was about to come and ask me for everything I had, all of it, on a mountainside on the far side of the world, in a kind of dark you cannot picture until you have flown your aircraft straight into the middle of it. 17 years later, I parked my truck outside a Naval Special Warfare Range complex and walked in, carrying my range bag, dressed like any other civilian shooter come to put rounds downrange on a quiet Tuesday. The senior enlisted man running the line was a gunner's mate named Hank Ferreira, a squared-away senior chief somewhere in his mid-40s, with the patient and slightly weary eyes of a man who has spent 2 decades watching people handle weapons badly and living to tell about it. He checked my paperwork. He watched me clear and safe my pistol without being told, watched my hands move through the motions that only 10,000 repetitions can build, and he gave me a small nod of professional respect. He did not know my rank. I had not offered it, and the paperwork I handed him did not advertise it. He pointed me toward an open lane in a rotation of young SEALs running pistol drills, and I went to work. I shoot the way I fly, quietly, and without drama, and without wasting emotion. My groupings came back tight, the holes all touching in the center of the target, the way they have to be after a lifetime of caring whether you hit what you aim at. And that, of all things, is what drew the attention of a young petty officer named Cole Brunner. He was 28 years old, built like a recruiting poster come to life, and absolutely certain that the world was a stage and that he was the star around whom it turned. He watched my target ride back on the carrier and saw those holes all kissing in the middle, and instead of leaving a stranger in peace, he decided there was a joke to be made here, and an audience standing right there, ready to laugh at it. He sauntered down the line toward me, taking his time, hands planted on his hips, his head tilted to one side in that mocking way young men use when they want everyone watching to know that they are not really listening, that they are just being generous with their attention. Hold up, he said, pitching his voice loud enough to carry to the whole line. Who let the soccer mom onto the range? You lost, ma'am. I think the range for spouses is back at the rec center. They got coffee. A couple of the younger guys laughed, the easy laughter of men following a leader. I set my pistol down flat on the bench, locked the slide back so the chamber showed empty, and let him keep going. Men like that always do. The trick is just to let them arrive wherever they are headed. Tell you what, Cole said, grinning now, fully playing to the crowd, turning a little so they could all see his face. Everybody out here's got a call sign. It's kind of a whole thing with us. So what's yours, sweetheart? Huh? What do they call you? Minivan? Carpool? Snack mom? The line snickered. He stood there with his hands on his hips and his ear tilted toward me, like he was doing me a favor by waiting to hear it, like the joke could not be complete until I played my part in it. I have only said my call sign out loud a handful of times in my entire life. It is not a thing I wear on my sleeve. It is not a thing I trade on or spend or pull out to win a room. But he had asked loudly in front of all of them, with that mocking tilt of his head. So I gave it to him. I turned and I looked him full in the face and I said it plainly and without heat. SABER won. I did not say it to win anything. I want you to understand that. I did not say it the way he had said his joke, performing for a crowd. I said it the way you say a thing that is simply true, The way you would give someone your last name if they asked. 2 words. I had carried them quietly for 17 years, and I had never once used them like a weapon, and I did not use them like one now. I just answered the question he had asked. For 1 full second, nothing happened at all. Cole's grin did not so much as twitch, but 2 lanes down the firing line, a Master Chief had gone completely and utterly still. His name was Boone Trujillo, 46 years old, built like a man who has carried heavy things up steep places for a living because he has. The color drained out of his face the way water drains out of a sink. Slowly, deliberately, with great care, he lowered his rifle until the muzzle pointed straight down at the deck. And then he came to attention. "Say it again," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. The whole line had already started to feel the air change. "Saber 1, I said again. Boone turned to face the line, and when he spoke this time, his voice carried all the way down to the last lane. "Rifles down," he said. "Everybody, rifles down. That is the pilot who flew us out of the Knar. That is the one who came when the other birds turned back and left us on that rock to die. And then it happened, the thing I will carry with me until the day I am gone. One by one, all the way down that firing line, every single rifle came down. Young men who had been laughing a breath before lowered their weapons and went silent, watching me, not understanding the whole of it yet, but feeling the weight of it land on them anyway. Hank Ferreira took the cap off his head, and Cole Brunner stood frozen in place, his hands still half raised, the joke dead and cold in his mouth, his eyes going from face to face down the line, trying to read what had just happened to him and finding no help in any of them. And I stood there in my stripped-down flight jacket and my low ball cap, surrounded by all that sudden silence. And I will tell you the truth. I would have traded the whole quiet range, every bit of that recognition, every lowered rifle, to bring home one man who did not come home. Hank Ferreira called a stand down on the line in a low, careful voice, and the range went in an instant from a place of noise and motion to something closer to a church. Boone Trujillo walked toward me with his hat held in both his hands now, and I watched the younger SEALs around us realize, in real time, right there on their faces, that the legend somebody had told them around a fire on some deployment was not a story after all. It was a person. It was a woman in a beat-up jacket who shot tight groups and did not raise her voice and did not look like anything they had pictured. "Captain," Boone said, and his hand was not quite steady when he held it out to me. "I don't know if you'd remember me. I was a kid that night, 29 years old, and absolutely certain I was going to die on that mountain. We all were. We had said our goodbyes to each other. And then we heard you coming." I remembered. I remember all of them. That is the part nobody warns you about when you sign up to be the one who comes. You do not get to forget the faces afterward. They do not fade. They move in, and they live in you, and they pay no rent, and they never leave. Let me tell you about the Kunar, because everything that happened on that range traces straight back to a single night in the autumn of 2009. I was 31 years old, a lieutenant flying a helicopter whose call sign that rotation was SABER 1. A team was pinned down on a mountainside, taking heavy fire from the high ground above them, and the weather had closed in, hard and fast the way it does in those mountains. 2 other aircraft launched ahead of me toward that valley, and both of them, flown by good people, made the call to turn back. I am not telling you that to make myself sound brave. I am telling you because it is simply what happened, and because for years afterward, I could not understand why I had gone in when better and more experienced pilots than me had looked at the same conditions and turned around. There is a kind of dark that is not the absence of light. It is dust and rotor wash and tracer fire all at once, a brown, churning nothing where the entire world shrinks down to the glow of the instruments in front of your face and a voice in your headset counting. I flew into that. I put the aircraft where the voice on the radio said the men were, down in that bowl of fire. And I held it there, fighting the controls, while rounds punched through the airframe with a sound like a hammer on a tin roof, while my crew in the back worked the hoist cable, while one by one those men came up out of the dark and tumbled into the cabin. 11 of them made it up that cable. 11 men went home to their families because the sound they could not see came for them anyway and refused to leave. One did not. His name was Theo Maurer. He was a petty officer 2nd class, 23 years old, with a wife back home and a kid on the way that he never got to meet. he did not make it to the hoist. I have flown more than 10,000 hours in the years since that night, and I have never once, not for a single day, set Theo Maurer down. The recognition, the call sign, the legend the young guys whisper to each other in the dark, all of it lives in the exact same place inside me where Theo lives. And I have never been able to reach for one of those things without my hand closing around the other. We flew home that night with the cabin full of men who did not speak, and I did not speak either, because there was nothing in the world to say. The aircraft was shot through in a dozen places, and it should not have been flying, and it flew anyway, all the way back, the way they sometimes do when they understand the job is not finished. I remember my crew chief in the back, his hand flat on the deck where we had laid out what we could bring of Theo, just resting it there, the whole way, so the kid would not be alone on the floor of that helicopter. Nobody told him to do it. I have thought about that hand for 17 years. That is the whole of it, right there. That is the thing the recruiting posters can never show you and the medals can never weigh. It is a man putting his hand down on a cold deck in the dark, so that the one they could not save does not have to ride home by himself. They gave me a medal for that night in the Kunar, eventually, after the paperwork wound its way through all the places paperwork goes. I have it in a drawer. I have never once hung it on a wall. People who do not understand assume that is modesty, and it is not. It is that I cannot look at the thing without doing the math. 11 and 1, 11 and 1. And the 1 always weighs more than the 11, no matter how I try to set the scale. For 17 years, I told myself that was simply the price of the job. That you carry what you cannot save, and you do not complain about the weight, because complaining is an insult to the people who paid more than you did. I told myself a lot of things in 17 years. Standing on that silent range, with every rifle pointed at the deck and a master chief at attention in front of me, I understood for the first time that some of the things I had told myself were not true. They were just walls I had built, so I would not have to feel the size of it. That night, after the range, I called Robin. She is a commander now, still my closest friend in the world, and she could hear it in my voice before I had gotten 3 words out. I did not tell her about the silence on the line, about every rifle coming down, about Cole frozen with his hands in the air. I told her about Theo. I always tell her about Theo. You brought 11 of them home, Tess, she said gently, the way she has said it to me 100 times. 11. 11 families still have their son, their husband, their father, because you flew into something that turned 2 other crews around, and in 17 years, you have never once let yourself count the 11. Only the 1. You only ever count the 1. Maybe today was the 11, finally, trying to get a word in, edgewise. I thought that would be the end of it. A strange day. A story I would tell Robin and no one else on this earth, and then back to the business of taking command of a wing. But Cole Brunner could not let it go, and I will tell you now, I am grateful that he could not. Word of what happened on the range moved through the teams the way these things always do. Fast and unstoppable, and entirely without my permission. By that same afternoon, Cole's chain of command knew the whole of it. His team chief, I was told, was already ready to make a hard and public example out of him. The kind of example that follows a young man around for years. And Boone Trujillo came to me privately, his jaw set tight, and made it very clear that he was more than prepared to help see it done. Say the word, ma'am, Boone said, his voice low and flat. Just say it, and that kid spends the next month wishing he had never opened his mouth. Nobody talks to you like that. Not on my range. Not anywhere, but especially not on my range. It would be my honor to handle it. And it would have been easy. I want to be honest about that. It would have been easy, and it even would have felt good for about a day, maybe 2. There is a part of all of us that wants to win the moment, that wants to watch the person who tried to make us small get made small in return. I felt that part of me wake up and stretch, but I have been the person in the room that everyone got wrong. I have stood there holding my logbook while a senior officer turned colors in front of his peers. And I will tell you something I learned a very long time ago, something that turned out to matter far more than any rank I ever pinned on. The people who actually helped me, the ones who built me into someone who could fly into the Kunar and come back out, were never the ones who humiliated me back when they had the chance. Never once. They were the ones who, instead of crushing me when I was down and clumsy and getting it wrong, took the time to show me what the job was actually asking of me. The senior chief who taught me to fly the hoist, steady and patient, instead of laughing at my first ugly attempts. The instructor who failed me on a check ride and then sat with me for 2 solid hours afterward, explaining exactly why, line by line, so that I would understand it, so that I would live. Those people built me, the ones who only ever wanted to win the moment. They built nothing at all, in anyone, ever. So I looked Boone Trujillo in the eye, and I told him no. I told him I did not want the young man broken. I told him I wanted him taught. Boone did not like my answer at first. I could see it working on him, the old instinct that says disrespect has to be paid back in kind, or it spreads. He stood there with his jaw tight, and finally he said quietly that the kid had embarrassed me in front of the whole line, and that if I let it go, people would say I was soft. I told him I had stopped caring what people said about me somewhere over the Pacific about 20 years ago, and that I had not flown into the Kunar to protect my own pride. I had flown in to bring his sorry self home, and I was not about to start spending that on a 28-year-old who had simply never been taught. Something in his face changed when I said that. He nodded once, slow, the way a man nods when you have said a thing he knows is right, even though it costs him to hear it. Then he told me that in 26 years of service, he had met exactly 2 officers he would have followed anywhere without question, and that I had just become the second one, and the first one was dead. I did not have anything to say to that. Some things you just have to stand there and receive. Cole found me near the parking lot at the end of that long day, standing by the tailgate of my truck. He had clearly been working himself up to it for hours, pacing somewhere out of sight, and when he finally got the words out, they came all in a rush, tumbling over each other. "Ma'am, I don't even have the words for how out of line I was. I didn't know who you were. That's not an excuse. I know it isn't an excuse. There's no excuse. I'm sorry. Whatever they decide happens to me. I earned every bit of it, and I won't say a word against it." I let him stand there in it for a long moment, because some lessons need a little silence around them in order to land all the way. Then I gave him the thing he was not expecting at all, which was not a sentence and not a punishment, but a conversation. "You don't need the words," I told him. "And you don't need to be destroyed either, no matter what your chief thinks. What you need is to understand who is standing on the line next to you. You are going to spend your entire career around people who do not look like whatever you expect a hero to look like. The quiet ones, the ones who never trade on the things they have done, the ones in the beat-up jacket with the patches stripped off. You never, ever know which one of them is the person who would fly straight into the dark to pull you off a mountain by a cable. Today you found that out the hard way, in front of everybody. Most people go their whole lives and never find it out at all. So learn it, carry it, and someday pass it on to some loud kid who needs to hear it." He stared at me like I had just handed him something heavy and valuable and fragile all at once, something he was suddenly terrified of dropping. And I climbed into my truck and drove home through the almond country in the dark, thinking that maybe the whole strange day had not really been about me at all. Here is the part of it that I did not see coming, the part that frightened me more than the Kunar ever had. After the range, the recognition did not stop. It came looking for me. It knocked on my door. A SEAL team reached out and asked if I would come and speak to them. Boone, it turned out, had been quietly organizing a reunion of the men from the Kunar for years, a gathering nobody had ever managed to get me to, and now they wanted me there more than ever. My first instinct, the instinct of an entire lifetime, was to say no, thank you, and close the door gently. I have spent my whole career being invisible on purpose, by design, like it was a tactic. Being seen felt like putting on a uniform 3 sizes too small and being told to wear it to a parade. Robin, as she always does, refused to let me hide inside myself. "You have spent 17 years deciding that nobody on earth was allowed to thank you," she said to me, sitting across my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "And you want to know why? I'll tell you why, because I've known you for 22 years. Because if they thanked you for the 11, then you would have to stand there and hear them not thank you for the 1, and you cannot stand it. You would rather refuse every bit of the gratitude than feel that one missing piece of it. But Tess, listen to me. Those 11 men have been carrying their own thank you around for 17 years, and every single time you slam the door on it. Let them say it. It was never for you. It was always for them. You owe them the chance to say it." I did not have an answer for that, which is exactly how I always know when Robin is right. Meanwhile, Cole Brunner was changing right in front of everyone who knew him. He started showing up early to everything. He started asking real questions, the kind that do not have a punchline waiting at the end of them. the kind a person only asks when they actually want the answer. And the other young operators, the ones who had followed him so easily into the joke that day, now found themselves following him right back out of it, watching how he carried himself, quieter and steadier and more deliberate than before. Boone watched the whole thing unfold over a few weeks, and one morning he pulled me aside. "You see what you did with that kid?" he said, nodding across the range to where Cole was helping a younger sailor with his stance, patient as anything. "You think you just flew us out one time 17 years ago, and that was that. But you didn't. You're still doing it, Captain. You're still pulling people out of bad places. You just never once seemed to see it happening right in front of you." I watched him over those weeks the way you watch weather change, slowly and then all at once. There was a morning a brand new sailor froze up on the line, hands shaking so badly he could not load his magazine, the whole rotation waiting on him, and the old Cole would have made a joke and gotten his laugh. The new Cole walked over, put a hand on the kid's shoulder, and stood there, talking to him, low and steady, until the shaking stopped. And then he stepped back and let the kid do it himself so the kid could own it. He did not look around to see if anyone had noticed. That is the whole thing, right there. That is the difference between a person performing and a person becoming. The first one always checks the room. The second one forgets the room is even there. I had spent my whole life forgetting the room was there, and watching that young man learn to forget it too was, I think, the first time I understood what Robin and Boone had both been trying to tell me. The flying out of the dark was never only about the cable and the hoist. Sometimes you pull a person out one quiet word at a time, on a range, on an ordinary morning, and they never even know it happened. And then I did the single hardest thing in this entire story, harder than the cooner, harder than the silence on that range. I got in my truck and I drove out to see Theo Mauer's mother. I had carried her address in my wallet, folded and refolded for 17 years, and I had never once used it. I was afraid, plainly and simply afraid, of what I would find waiting for me on her face when she opened the door and saw the pilot who had brought 11 home and left her son on the mountain. I knocked. A small gray-haired woman opened the door, and when I told her who I was and why I had come, she did not look at me with blame. She did not look at me with anything I had spent 17 years bracing for. She reached out and put both of her thin hands around mine, and she thanked me. She thanked me for the 11. She told me that every one of those 11 men had written to her over the years, every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary of that night, and that because of them, because of the family those letters had built around her, she did not feel as though she had lost Theo, all alone in the world. She had gained, she said, a family she never asked for, and could not now imagine living without. I stood on that porch, and I finally let myself hear it. The one word I had spent 17 years refusing to accept from anyone. "Thank you." And standing there, with her hands still wrapped around mine, I understood at last that carrying Theo did not require me to erase the 11 from the ledger. I could hold both of them at the same time. I had been holding both of them all along, every single day. I had just never once let another living soul help me carry the weight of it. The story still had one more door left to open, and it was the oldest door of them all, the one that led back home to where it started. My father heard about the range from a cousin of mine who had seen it spread around as a secondhand story, the kind that travels through families faster than any official report ever could. Vernon Rourke, 76 years old now, slower than he used to be, his hands not as sure on an engine as they once were, called me one evening sounding awkward in a way I had truly never heard from him in my whole life. "Heard something," he said, and I could picture him standing in the kitchen with the cord wrapped around his finger. "About a range and a bunch of Navy boys. And you. Couldn't make heads or tails of it the way your cousin tells it. Tess, I got to be honest with you, I don't think I ever actually knew all these years what it is you really do out there." In all those years, all those decades, he had never once asked. So I told him I would come out, and I drove the long road back to the valley on a Saturday morning. We sat together on the hood of a truck, a newer truck than the one from my childhood, but parked in the same spot in the yard, under the same wide and faded sky, and I told him about the helicopter and the hoist and the brown churning dark. I told him about flying into something that turned 2 other crews around. I told him about the 11 men who went home. And I told him, for the first time out loud to my own father, about Theo Maurer, who did not. He listened to the whole of it, start to finish, and not once, not a single time did he tell me it was no place for a girl. When I finally finished talking, he was quiet for a long, long time. The sun moved. A truck went by out on the road, and then he said the thing I had waited my entire life to hear, although by then, God help me, I had long since stopped waiting for it. I told you the sky wasn't for you, he said, slow, the words coming hard, because I could not stand the thought of losing you up in it, of you being up there in the dark in one of those things, and me down here on the ground, not able to do one single thing about it. That was my fear talking, Tess. That whole time, it was my fear, and I dressed it up as good sense, and I put it on you, and it was never the truth. You were the truth. You were the truth the whole time, and I just could not make myself look straight at it. I reached over and I took his hand then, that big rough hand that had fixed 1,000 engines and never once flown in any of them, and I held it on the hood of that truck. I told him I had not needed him to be sorry. I told him I had made my peace a long time ago with the way things were between us, or I had thought I had, the way you think a wound has healed until somebody presses on it. But I told him the truth too, because we were finally telling the truth out there. I told him that for 30 years, a small part of me had still been that 18-year-old girl waiting for him to look up at the sky and say, "That one, that is my daughter up there." He put his other hand over mine, both of his hands around mine now, the same way Theo's mother had held them, and he said it. He said it right out loud into the evening air. "That one, that is my daughter." He pointed up at the empty blue with one finger like there was a plane in it, and his voice cracked all the way through. And we sat there, two people who had wasted a lot of years, not wasting this one. My mother came out of the house then, carrying a cardboard box she had kept in the hall closet for 30 years. Inside it was everything, every newspaper clipping, every grainy photograph of me standing next to an aircraft, the little announcement from when I earned my wings, a program from a ceremony that Vernon had refused to attend, the edges soft from handling. She had quietly saved all of it, every scrap, for 3 decades while he scoffed and shook his head, a witness who had never once stopped believing in me, not for a single day. And she had never said one word about any of it, the very same way she had never said a word about that library book she set on my pillow when I was 18. I forgave my father, not because he asked me to, because he never quite did. And not for free, because forgiveness for free is not worth the breath it takes to say it. I forgave him because he finally turned and looked straight at who I had become, the whole of it, and he did not flinch, and he did not look away. That is the only kind of forgiveness that is ever held up under any weight at all. The kind that comes after someone finally sees you. Nothing was finished yet. That is the strange thing about a whole life turning itself over. It does not happen all at once, in a single clean moment, the way it does in movies. It arranges itself slowly, piece by piece, and you stand there in the middle of all of it, not quite able to believe that it is heading where it seems to be heading. The change of command ceremony was only days away now, the ceremony where I would formally take the rescue wing and stand up in front of more people than I had ever wanted looking at me. I kept sitting down to write the speech, and I kept cutting it shorter and shorter, because everything I tried to put down on the page sounded far too big for me, too grand, and the only things that rang true were small and plain. Cole Bruner had earned himself a junior leadership role by then, a real one, and when I crossed paths with him on the base, he asked me, almost shyly, hat in his hands, if he might be allowed to be there when I took command. He said he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He said, looking at his boots, that a lot of the guys did. Boone Trujillo had been busy in the meantime, working the phones the way only a Master Chief can. He had reached every man from the Kunar that he could find, 10 of the 11 still living, scattered now all across the country, getting older, raising kids, coaching Little League, running businesses, each of them carrying their own quiet, private version of that one night. And every one of them was coming. They were getting on planes and in trucks, and they were coming. And he had called Theo Maurer's mother, and she was coming too, and she would sit in the front row, right up front, in the seat where Theo himself would have been if the cable had reached him in time. Robin came over 2 nights before, and she sat at my kitchen table and watched me cross out line after line of that speech with a pen until the page was more ink than words. She finally took the pen out of my hand. She told me to stop trying to write a speech that explained me, because no speech ever could, and because the people coming did not need me explained to them. They had been there. They knew. She said the only job a speech like this one had was to be short enough to let everyone get to the part where they could finally say the thing they came to say. Then she slid the page back across the table to me with everything crossed out except for 4 lines, and those 4 lines were the only true ones I had managed to write all night. I kept them. I read exactly those 4 lines at the ceremony and not one word more, and they were enough. And I have her to thank for that, the same way I have had her to thank for most of the times in my life I managed to get out of my own way. She asked me, before she left that night, whether I was going to be all right standing up there. Not all right giving the speech. All right being looked at. She has always seen straight through me, Robin has. I told her I did not know. I told her I had spent so long being the one behind the controls, the one in the dark, doing the work, while everyone else got pulled up into the light, that I genuinely did not know if I remembered how to be the one the light was pointed at. She squeezed my hand, and she told me that it was not a spotlight that was coming for me. It was a thank you. And that a thank you is not something you perform under. It is something you let happen to you. I have thought about the difference between those two things every day since. Cole asked me one more thing, the last time I saw him before the ceremony. He asked carefully, like he was not sure he had the right, what Theo had been like. Not the mission, not the legend. Theo, the person. And I realized standing there that in 17 years, almost no one had ever asked me that, because everyone was so busy with the part of the story that had a hero in it that they forgot to ask about the part that had a loss. So I told him Theo was a terrible card player who could never keep a straight face, and that he carried a coin his grandfather had carried before him, and that he had a way of making the worst day funny without making it small. Cole listened to every word like it mattered, because it did. And when I finished, he said quietly that he would remember him too now. And that is how the dead stay with us. One more person agreeing to carry the name. I drove away from that conversation understanding that Cole Bruner had become, without either of us deciding it, a man worth flying into the dark for. The night before the ceremony, I could not sleep, so I got dressed and I went and stood out on the empty flight line in the dark. There were aircraft tied down in long, neat rows, dark shapes against a darker sky, and the field was quiet, and overhead the stars were out all the way down to the horizon. The same stars, the same wide sky I had watched the crop dusters disappear into when I was a girl of 18 on the hood of a truck. I talked, the way I sometimes still do when no one is around to hear it, to the part of the sky where I keep Theo. I told him the 11 were coming. I told him his mother was coming, that she would be in the front row. And I asked myself the question I had been circling for weeks, the one I still did not have any answer to. After all these years of being the one who comes for everyone else, after a whole lifetime of letting the cold record speak for me so that I would never have to stand up and speak for myself, would I finally be able to stand still in a room full of people and let them come for me? Could I let myself be seen all the way? Not as a legend, not as a call sign, whispered around a fire, but simply as the woman who showed up that night and every night after. I did not know. I stood out on that flight line for a long, long time. And the sky did not give me an answer, and eventually I went back inside, still not knowing. The hangar was packed full the morning I took command. They had set up the chairs in long, straight rows on the polished gray deck, with the colors standing at the front and an aircraft parked behind the podium, like a silent witness to the whole thing. Robin was at my side in her dress uniform, steady as bedrock, exactly where she has been for 22 years. My mother sat in the rows with her hands folded over the top of that cardboard box, the one she had refused to leave at home, holding it in her lap like something precious. And my father sat beside her in a dark suit I had never once seen him wear, his back straight as a flagpole, his big mechanic's hands resting on his knees. When the moment finally came for me to be piped aboard and for the orders to be read aloud, something happened that was not written anywhere in the program that nobody had planned. Boone Trujillo stood up. He just rose to his feet in the middle of all those rows. And then the man sitting beside him stood up. And then the man beside him. 10 men from the Kuner, rising one after another in a hangar full of strangers who did not yet understand what they were watching, until slowly the whole room began to grasp that something was being honored here that ran far deeper than a routine change of command. And then the entire hangar was on its feet, every last person in it. And there, in the front row, a small gray-haired woman stood up too, with a framed photograph of her son held tight against her chest with both hands. The salute. The salute I had spent an entire career deflecting, sliding away from, ducking, hiding from behind my logbook and my low ball cap and my stripped-off patches and my careful invisibility. It came for me at last, all of it at once, the whole room of it. And this time, for the first time in my life, I did not run from it. I did not deflect it or wave it off or change the subject. I stood at the center of that room, in front of all of them, and I let it land on me. I let every single one of them see me, all the way down. Cole Brunner was there, standing tall near the back, a young man who had learned the hard way, in front of everybody, what the quiet person on the line beside him might be made of, underneath, and who would now spend his whole long career teaching that same hard lesson forward to the loud kids who came after him. My father watched his daughter take command of a wing and, for the first time in his life and mine, had nothing to make smaller, nothing to qualify, nothing to worry into a smaller shape. He had only a pride so large he did not seem to know where to put it, and so it just sat there on his face, plain and open, while his eyes shone. And when it was all over, when the orders had been read and the command was mine, Theo Mauer's mother found her way to me through the crowd. She took my hand one more time, and she pressed something small and worn into my palm and folded my fingers over it. It was a coin, a little challenge coin Theo had carried with him everywhere, its face rubbed smooth by his thumb over 23 years. She told me it was time, past time, that I let myself set the weight down. She said I had carried it well enough and long enough for the both of us, and that Theo would have told me the same thing if he could, probably with less patience than she had. I read my 4 lines. I thank the men who came before me and the families who carry the cost of this work in rooms nobody ever sees, and the ones who did not come home, by name, all of them, including a petty officer second class named Theo Mauer who would have been 40 years old that month. And when I said his name out loud in that full hangar, his mother in the front row closed her eyes and nodded, like I had finally handed back to her something she had been waiting 17 years for someone to say in public. That was the whole speech. 4 lines and 1 name. Robin was right, the way she usually is. There was nothing else that needed saying, because the saying was never going to be my job that day. It was theirs. Afterward, there was the long line of handshakes, and somewhere in it, Boone gripped my hand and could not get a word out, just held on, and Cole came through, stiff and formal and proud, and a dozen men I had last seen as faces coming up out of the dark introduced me to wives and to children who would not exist if a stranger in a beat-up jacket had turned her aircraft around that night the way 2 other crews did. I shook every hand. I let every one of them land. And the strange thing, the thing I did not expect, was that it did not make the one I lost weigh any less. It just meant I was no longer carrying him alone. I want to tell you what I have learned from all of it, because if you have come this far down the road with me, then the odds are good that you have been underestimated somewhere along the way, too. Maybe you still are. The best revenge was never proving them wrong. I promise you it never was. The best revenge was becoming someone worth being right about, and then finally, when the moment came, letting the people who had known it all along say so out loud, to my face, where I could not escape it. If you have ever been the quietest person in the room, the one everyone got wrong, the one who let the work do all the talking because you were afraid of what might happen if you opened your own mouth and stood up for yourself, then I hope someday you let them see you too. You do not have to earn it twice. You already earned it the first time. Let them say thank you. You will find, exactly as I did on that range and in that hangar, that the truth was always strong enough to stand up entirely on its own. And so it turns out, were you. If you have ever been the quietest person in a room full of people who thought they had you figured out, I would really like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, what did it feel like when they finally understood who you were? And was it the recognition you wanted, or had you already made your peace without it? I read every comment and I answer the ones I can. And if this story stayed with you, the way Theo has stayed with me all these years, do me a small favor and hit subscribe so the next one finds you too. Thank you for being here with me today.